Bioneers, it's my people. This is where I feel it's the birthplace. It really is a joining of the midwives, the ideas, the ingenuity, the creativity, the sparks of inspiration. Bioneers brings all of these visions and all of this action together.
There's nothing that's off the table here. It's all possible, and it's all connected, and it's so liberating.
Welcome to Free Speech TV. My name is Carl Nagin. We're here for continuing coverage of the Bioneers 2019 conference. And this is part of our special segment on urban farming and gardening and the Green New Deal. And I am so honored and pleased to have as our guest Karen Washington. Karen is she's been called the godmother of the urban farming movement in America. She's also been listed by Ebony magazine along with Beyonce and Oprah as one of the most influential Black Americans today. She is a longtime food justice advocate and a leader of the urban gardening movement. She is also the founder, one of the founders and co-owner of Rise and Root Farm. That's a farm in, where is it located?
It's in Orange County, New York.
Orange County, New York, but it's got a, there's another name for it. It's like the Black Dirt region.
That's right, the Black Dirt.
I like that. Okay, Karen, welcome to Free Speech TV and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
All right. I'd like to start by asking you to tell us a little bit about what it was in your experience, your growing up, your experience living in New York, that led you to become an urban farmer in the Bronx.
Yeah, so people ask me that question all the time, like, how did you become a farmer growing up in New York City? My parents weren't farmers, my grandparents weren't farmers. I was brought up in the housing projects, the Lower East Side. It wasn't until I moved to the Bronx in 1985, bought a brand new home, part of the American dream, and I had a big backyard. And I had three options, either to cement it, put a lawn on it, or to grow food, and I decided to grow food. And so how I learned was basically by word of mouth, by the library, by books. The internet was in infancy at the time. So, and there's four things I decided I wanted to grow. Collard greens, had to grow collard greens as part of my history and my culture. Wanted to grow eggplant because it sounds sort of funky. Green peppers, I like green peppers, but it was the tomato that changed my world. Yeah. And I say that because for me, the tomato was pale, had no taste, and it was in a supermarket. So when I put that first seed and I saw, first of all, it grew on a vine, it was red, and when I bit into it, it just changed my world. So then I started gardening back in my backyard, but then across the street was an empty lot. And so for 3 years, from 1985 to 1988, there was this huge, late empty lot. And so I decided, along with community residents, to change that empty lot into a community garden, which is now the Garden of Happiness. It's now 31 years of age. But it really got me looking into the food system and encouraging people to grow their own food.
Were there any other urban gardens in that area of New York where you were living?
Well, in New York City, back in the late 1970s, the Lower East Side was just starting to do what was called guerrilla gardening. That means taking over lots and just throwing in seeds. And I think that was really the start of the community garden movement in New York City. But in the Bronx, we were surrounded by so many burnt out buildings. At one time, the Bronx, quote unquote, was burning. And so can you imagine that New York at one time had over 15,000 vacant lots, mostly in low-income neighborhoods and neighborhoods of color. And so, but the movement has grown. And now we are really trying to fight for more open space versus development, which is happening in a lot of cities.
You received some help from the New York Botanical Society. Let's talk about
Yes,
that.
so the New York Botanical Garden, my life has always been aligned with well wishes and the stars being aligned. And so when I was in that garden, in that empty lot with this man named Jose Lugo, all of a sudden this green van pulls up and it has Bronx green up, and two women come out and they said they're from the New York Botanical Garden and they would like to have this as their first project. And so from then I've been really working with the New York Botanical Garden. I'm now on their board and been traveling around with them, turning empty lots into community gardens and getting the word out there how important it is to grow food.
That's wonderful. That's a really wonderful story. You also at a certain point went to the University of Santa Cruz in their Center for Agroecology and Sustainable Food Systems. What was that experience like for you, and what impact did it have on your understanding of urban farming?
Yes, so in 2008, I ventured out to Santa Cruz, like you said, to a program called CASFIS, the Center for Agroecology and Sustainable Food System, to learn how to grow organically. And for me, it was a bit of surprise, first of all, because they have certain degrees of farming. They have a large farm, they have a community garden, and they also have an orchard. And so when I first got there and I saw this huge organic farm, all of a sudden trauma sort of surfaced, believe it or not, as a woman of color, because I heard back in the day about our relationship as Black people to farming, that it was slave mentality, slave labor, and sort of those negative things started to really surface, that I felt that I didn't belong, that, why am I here? And it wasn't until I said, I have to face my fears and put my hands in the soil. And once I knelt down at the farm and put my hands in the soil, I felt this sense of belonging. But what I got out of that program is that not only did I learn how to grow organically, but I started to question the food system, because as we went around to various farms, the question that I asked is like, where are the farmers that look like me? And so really taking it upon myself to do a lot of investigation about Black farmers in the United States, and was really taken aback by looking at my own state, New York State, to find that out of 56,000, at that time, 56,000 farmers, only 116 were Black. And then looking at the census of various states here in these United States, to find that the numbers are dismal. Some states don't have any Black farmers. And the fact that I felt compelled to say something about it, because if no one took notice of that number, those problems, I would eventually see that and forecast that within 10 to 15 years, there'll be no Black farmers, and then we'll have one race of people controlling our food system. So I went back to New York, guns a-blazing, and really started with a group of my friends, the first Black Farmers in Urban Garden Conference in 2010, to sort of talk about the plight of the Black farmer and talk about the racial inequalities, the wealth inequalities, the land loss that has been happening for years around Black agriculture and Black wealth.
Has that conference continued? Is that group still?
That conference is continuing big time. As a matter of fact, this month, October 25th to the 27th, we're having our 9th annual Black Farmers in Urban Garden Conference in New York City. And so we've been up and down from the north to the south, from the west to the Midwest, really taking on the issues that affect the Black community and Black agriculture as well. And it's been a dream of me. I'm very spiritual, so I hear the ancestors that are really calling out for justice and really getting the message for so long that we've been asking for a seat at the table, but now we know that we have to make our own table and our own seats.
Mm-hmm. You've spoken a lot about the idea of growing food with intention, and you started one of the founders of Rise and Root Farm. Can you talk about that and how you see farming as a spiritual practice?
Not only farming as a spiritual practice, but an act of justice, political justice and food justice, and an act of human right. And I say that because the two most precious things that we have on this earth is really food and water. And believe it or not, we live in the greatest country in the world, where we grow enough food and we waste enough food to feed the people in this country, but yet we have hunger and poverty. I got to think about that. 40 million people in poverty. Why is that? And a lot of it is based on the power structure in the food system and how we have allowed a handful of corporations, mostly white men, to not only control our food, but our water, our seeds. And for so long, we've taken it back. We've been complacent. And so starting Rise and Root with my friends, we all come from urban farming background, was a statement how, as women of color, as white women, as LGBTQ women, how do we move this food system forward that has our faces, that has our voices, but in turn really promote what food justice should look like and be. If you look at the agricultural system globally, the foundation are women, but yet we're not recognized. We're not given the technological assistance that we need in terms of education and resources, but yet we have those numbers. And so something has to change. And through Rise and Root, what we're trying to do is just get that message out that we as women are a force to be reckoned with.
Wonderful. And how are you going about doing that other than
Well, I think by how we grow intentionally. How, first of all, we have 3 acres, 2 that we are intentionally growing on, where 1 we put for rotation. But I think, first of all, to acknowledge the fact that the land that we're on is a land, we don't own that land. You know, even though we don't even lease that land, that land was once the Lanai people. And for us to acknowledge that's number 1. To acknowledge the fact that we are stewards of that land, and each day give thanks and blessings that we are on that land to grow food for people in need. That our food is a right for everyone, regardless of their nationality, their race, the ability to form where they live. And so we're very intentional about that, and to recognize that people that come to our farm can see the full meaning of growing food and what that food looks like, what it's intended to do, and there are women at the forefront that's trying to do that work.
That's wonderful. Do you have education and other outreach programs that you do?
Yes, definitely. So again, what has come out of the movement of urban agriculture is the start of the New York School of Urban Agriculture. We call it Farm School. And that happened whereby we took 40 people in a room and told everyone leave their egos at the door, and let's do something that was similar to the CASPAS program in Santa Cruz, because a lot of people, which is a 6-month program, can't go to California. And so what is it that we can do in terms of really pick the knowledge that we have in New York City, the wisdom that we have, and put forth a school that would encourage people to understand the nuances of growing food, but the justice behind growing food, which is really, really important. So we're very proud of being one of the founders of Farm School NYC in New York City.
That's fantastic. For people who want to involve themselves with that work, and how would they?
Yeah, so if you just, put in a New York School of Urban Agriculture or farmschool.org, it will come up. If you want to get involved in what is happening at Rise and Root Farm, so again, it's riseandrootfarm.com, because we are a for-profit farm. We want to make sure that people understand that we're trying to make farming profitable. It's hard work. We have so many young people that come to us with stars in their eyes, because they understand their relationship to food and land. They understand their history, and that's something that I like to talk about, especially being an African-American woman, that for so long our history and our place in agriculture has been denied. And so sometimes at these conferences, when I listen to the Mark Bittmans and the Michael Polans and all these people that they put to the forefront of the food movement, I got to say, what about George Washington Carver? Because that's our hero, but yet he's never mentioned at food conferences, never mentioned in the conversation about food and social justice, but yet that man has done so much for agriculture in general. And so getting people that information, getting people to go away from the stain of slavery, which for so long has been the narrative of the African-American experience when it comes to food and farming, and get people to understand why were we brought here? Why, as Africans enslaved to a new land, brought here? We were brought here because of our education and intellect when it came to agriculture and farming. The colonists could have never survived without our intuition, without our knowledge, without education around food and farming. And so once you put that history into the eyes and minds of young Black and brown children, they get it. And they different meaning. And now all of a sudden they got that power. They got that power in their hand to want to grow food, to want to come back to the land.
I know that George Washington Carver has been a was an inspiration, is an inspiration for you. Could you talk a little bit about?
Yes, I remember.
what way?
Well, I remember going to Tuskegee and visiting his gravesite, visiting the work that he has done. This man has had over hundreds and thousands of patents. You know, it display nothing is really talked about that. Talk about how he took a wagon and went around to various farms, both black and white, to help people look at their crop, to do crop management, the crop rotation, looking at ways to combat diseases. And yet, people don't talk about him. But we in the African community definitely talk about the work and put him on a high pedestal that he has contributed to agriculture, not only here in the United States, but worldwide and globally. And I think he will not be forgotten.
Thank you, Karen Washington. Is there anything else you'd like to say about your work and what your future directions are?
Yes, so right now, I do a lot of work. I go around the country really talking about food justice and what that looks like. We still have a problem here in when we talk about food and food conferences, a lack of diversity and a lack of inclusion. I still go to conferences and I can still count on both hands how many people that look like me, but yet we talk about food systems and we talk about food justice, but we need to do a little bit more in terms of reaching out to all types of people in terms of diversity and inclusion, not just get people here because it looks well or window dressing, but make sure that people come here with their experience of being able to be more vocal, to be more participatory. I think when we talk about inclusion and diversity, it has to come with power. And so I challenge community organizations, I challenge farm organizations and food organizations to be more diverse and more inclusive in the work that they do and not just be lip service.
Thank you for being such a wonderful visionary and spokesperson for food justice.
Thank you so much for having me.
Being with us.
Thank you very much.
Thank
My
you,
pleasure.
Karen.